Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Outlander is the show that this week is only tangentially about Claire and Jamie Fraser, instead focusing on their daughter Brianna and her kind of on-off boyfriend Roger, both of whom are heading back in time chasing after people that they love. Episode 7, Down the Rabbit Hole, picks up with Brianna, and she's stuck in Inverness-shire, but on the wrong side of history, in the cold, snowy winter hills, trying to find her way down to Ayr as soon as she can. Only, like a dope, she ends up tripping and falling and spraining her ankle, and despite giving it a wee duke and an icy burn, and the healing properties of, a PBJ Sani, she's not doing all too well, and she passes out beside a tree and has like a flashback of her kind of sort of adopted dad Frank. A flash Frank, if you will. And then she wakes up in a strange house, and it only belongs to Leary. I mean, talk about luck, or not luck, if you say so. Thing is, Leary doesn't know Bree from Adam, and she's actually quite concerned for the wee waif and tells her that she can stay as long as she needs to, and she introduces her to her wee ginger daughter. And that night, Ian pops over to pay Jamie's alimony money, or at least part of it, and then Bree overhears the argument, and she sticks her head in for no particularly obvious reason. And the next day, Bree starts bonding with the wee ginger ninja, and they start talking about what it's like to miss their parents, or to have one parent that isn't loved by the other one. And then, that night, Leary reminisces about happier times, and she ends up telling a bedtime story to the girls, and it's all kind of sweet and nice. And that sets memories off in Bree, including trying to go and chat to Frank when he was drunk and despondent, and it turned out that he actually had the newspaper clipping about Jamie and Claire's obituary all along. And then eventually, it all comes out, and Leary tries at first to sort of hide her feelings behind pointed questions and sharp comments, but it's not long before she's throwing insults about Claire, and then starts to accuse Brianna of witchcraft herself. And Bree takes this as a cue to get the heck out of Dodge, and while she's packing, Leary ends up locking her in, presumably to get the authorities to burn her as a witch. I mean, despite a distracting flash Frank about the night he died, Bree frantically tries to escape, but it turns out that windows are her only weakness, and in the end she gets rescued by the wee ginger lassie, who takes her all the way to Lallybroch. And then Ian gives her some of Claire's stuff and packs her off to the docks, and she ends up taking some wifey into her service as a maid or something, in a scene that feels oddly crowbarred in and contrived. But anyway, off she goes, and just before she leaves she has a vision of Frank standing looking at her with a kind of sad pride in her eyes, and then she goes off on her journey. Meanwhile, a week later, maybe, it's not very clear, Roger's scraped his face and, gone dressed in some quite unflattering gear, and he's gone to the Stones to find Claire, and he says bye to wee Fiona, and then he does a time travel. And clearly he doesn't actually have anything like as bad a time of it, since, in almost no time at all, he's in Ayr at the same docks, and he's trying to get passage, and he only manages to pick Psycho the Bonnet for a captain to tag along with, and Bonnet's nah, he's not really into it, but then he relents because Roger offers to work for passage instead of being a passenger, and on board it seems that he's a conscientious worker, and he's quite good with people and babbies, and it doesn't help when a wee girl gets smallpox and Bonnet tells him to throw her overboard, and Roger says no obviously, but then Bonnet does it anyway, and then orders that anyone who's got a rash should be similarly sent down to Davy Jones' locker. And of course the wee babby with the cute mum turns out to be Mackenzie, so Roger offers to hide her and sneak her rations, but then he gets caught by Bonnet and he gives him a coin toss flip for his life, and wouldn't you know it, he wins. Phew. So what did I think? Well, this week was really interesting. I mean, straight out the gate, this is an episode that had absolutely no appearance of Claire or Jamie. I mean, that's got to be a first, surely, in the whole series. I mean, the closest we got to actually seeing, or indeed even hearing any of them, was you kind of overheard Claire having an argument, and it was that scene from, back in season 3, where they were doing their best sort of Liz Taylor, Spencer Tracy kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, that was a great scene. But anyway, there was no Ian, there was no Murta, there was no native supermodels, no bear men, and there wasn't even any measles this week. I mean, no, this was all about Roger and Bree. And then with a bunch of guest appearances from a few actors who haven't actually been in the show for a wee while. I mean, it was almost like a secondary character spectacular. And while it was nice to see Stephen Cree again as Big Ian, and although it was really nice to see him, it was a shame that we missed out on Jenny, but apparently the actress wasn't available to shoot her scenes because she's tearing it up on Broadway or something. So anyway, nice one, Hen, but we missed your wee face. Anyway, we also got to see Fiona again, even though it was just for a second before Roger vanished away. And then we also got to see Ed Spieler's back as Stephen Bonnet, totally chewing up the scenery as the nasty bad pirate. And he even had a scene. I was saying last week about how, not to compare the show with Game of Thrones maybe. Well, it's kind of hard to do that when the show is straight up paying direct homage to famous scenes of Game of Thrones. I mean, look, it's the same scene. Also, speaking of homages, was it just me, or did this little bit here remind anyone a bit of Aliens?
How do you want this?
Where you want it?
Just saying. Just seemed similar. Just saying. But the real surprise this week was the whole barrel load of like flashbacks of Frank and Bree growing up, and the fact that there was so many scenes with Leary. I mean, I have to say it was actually nice to have them back. I mean, good to see the actors back on the show. I mean, because Tobias was being all kind of doting dad mode, and his scenes were actually all really kind of bittersweet because we're watching them, but knowing that we're seeing him after, like through Bree's eyes more or less, and these are kind of memories of her dead dad. And it was also really good to see like Nell Hudson back in the show as like the scary, unbalanced Leary. Although, like much like when she turned up last season, it really doesn't kind of feel like she's actually 20 years older. I mean, the actress barely looks older than Sophie Skelton because I mean she is only like a couple of years older than Sophie Skelton, and a wee bit of makeup to make her face look rough and reddish doesn't really hide that. I mean, the fact is she's a pretty girl and she's young, so without sticking on loads of latex and wrinkles and stuff, then it's just not going to work. But that's not a big thing. And I say this now because I know it's going to have some of you tearing your hair out, but I really liked this episode, and two of the main reasons for that were Frank and Leary. Now, I've got a good memory, and I remember that anytime I say something nice about either of them, there's always some folks who kind of harumph and get a bit cross. And I know that some folks really hate Leary and they kind of dislike Frank intensely because of stuff that happens in the book. But this is a TV show, and I only go by what's on the TV show. And I've spoken about Frank before, but the important part I think here about it is that, especially in the context of this episode, Frank raised a daughter with Claire, and he loved that daughter with all his heart. And finally, when she was grown up, and he ended it with Claire, he planned to go back to England with someone who he actually loved, who loved him back. And he asked Bree to come with him, and we see that now. And then because she was the only real family they had, he wanted her to be with him, but before they could actually properly discuss it, he was killed in a car crash, and that's a shame. And I know that most book readers are probably going to sit there and going, "Oh, but liking Frank's silly because in the in the book, he had all these affairs and he was much nastier and stuff." But that's not the Frank that I know because I've only ever read like book one and the start of book two, so I don't really know how that's supposed to go. And the Frank that's on the show is pretty much a good man. I mean, he's a nice guy. And I think that's a problem that comes possibly from the fact that the book's version of Frank is all written from Claire's point of view, and we don't really get a sense of him. But in the TV show, he's much more evenly handedly viewed, because the show like does it differently. And because I don't root for like Jamie and Claire over every other aspect of the storytelling. I'm just enjoying it as a narrative. Then I'm quite happy for Frank to be a nice guy. I mean, it hardly needs to be said that Tobias Menzies was really good because he's always really good. He's a really good actor, but he was kind of quiet and pensive. And I love the fact that he had this kind of curse of knowledge like heavy on his shoulders. I mean, wow. I mean, think about how that shakes up the dynamic of the story. I mean, this means that final confrontation between like Frank and Claire before he got in the car and drove off. I mean, that means that he actually already knew that she was going to go back in time because he'd already read the obituary. And not only that, he knew that she'd go back in time, be together with Jamie, and that she'd die in a fire. And that maybe brings up the question of maybe he should have told her that. And for all we know, maybe he would have once he'd gone away and he calmed down. Maybe he would have written her a letter and said, "Look, you're going to go back in time, and but don't leave the gas on that night or whatever." But anyway, it's kind of mind-bending stuff for the canon. And yeah, I'm sure that some folks are already frothing at the mouth because it's maybe different from the books. But anyway, all I can say is I absolutely loved all that. And I could literally talk about this all day, so let's move on. As to Leary, I mean, that's a totally different story because like Leary is a basket case. I mean, there's no arguing with that. But I think here for once we actually got to see Leary being herself. I mean, the actual better, nicer side of her, like the caring mother and the kind host. And it's easy to forget that apart from a couple of scenes of her back in season one, when she was only supposed to be about 15 or 16, we've only ever seen her in the context of having arguments or like some situation like that with Jamie, who she like both loves and hates in equal measure, and Claire, who she literally just wants to see dead because she blames like all the bad things in her life on Claire. And now suddenly we get an episode of her just being normal for most of it, and actually being a bit sad. And it's kind of touching because you realise that she's a real person. She's just trying to get on with it and stuff, and she's nice to people that she meets, people who need help. I mean, I really want to like commend the work of like Nell Hudson because she was really great, especially like this one moment.
I was hoping to catch a ride with someone on the road.
And you see that? I mean, that one look, that tells you absolutely everything you need to know about how she views the world and what she thinks about being a young woman in this world and what can happen. I mean, she's terrified for Bree, the idea of her like going on the road by herself, and it fits perfectly with everything we know about her, about how her first like husband used to abuse her and how she couldn't be feel comfortable being intimate with Jamie. I mean, the fact is, she's a survivor of like domestic abuse and rape, and one who doesn't have the wherewithal to like deal with it herself, and never had anyone to rely on who could help her with it properly. I mean, she's properly mentally ill and broken, and they don't have like therapy in the 18th century, so she's lost in a place where the only way she can cope is to lash out angrily, or literally just call people a witch. And like Claire is a total hair trigger for her that just sends her off the deep end. And I really like the fact that that's how they've done this, and I think it makes sense as a character. It allows us to humanize her. We don't have to like her, but it allows us to humanize her as a person. And I think that's some really good writing, directing, and acting work all round on this. On the other hand, can we just talk about Brianna for a second? And about peanut butter and jam sandwiches? Now, okay, I get that they probably weren't supposed to have actually been made in Boston. I mean, it kind of looked like that from the opening shot. And like, but if they had, they wouldn't have survived all the way to Carnadoon because I mean that would have taken like what, at least a few days travel. I mean, it's a sandwich; it would have gone nasty and horrible. And even then, she only brought one sandwich and like no medical supplies. She didn't even bring like a box of aspirin or something. I mean, Bree's supposed to be intelligent, and this makes it look like she's an idiot who just didn't go out prepared. And you know, she's gotten herself a vaguely ye olde looking outfit, but she didn't bring any supplies with her. I mean, I'd have had like a sack full of stuff with me. That had like a knitted handbag with a tiny purse and like a wee knife and a map and like a snack sandwich. I mean, come on. I mean, Roger didn't look like he had anything either, but he didn't seem to have any problems because he has plot armor or something. I don't know. Anyway, I mean, but that whole like she tripped and fell over an ankle cliche, I mean, God, that's so done to death. I mean, seriously, how often in a month do you actually sprain your ankle? I mean, I can tell you, I've sprained mine never in my entire life. And I go running about fields and I tripped up all the time when I was a kid and I never ever hurt myself like that. So I don't buy it, especially when that fall just didn't look so at all. I mean, maybe that was just, the way they shot it. Also, what was up with that scene with the warming the bedpan thing? Like when Leary was like sticking that thing under the bed. I mean, it's a bedpan. I mean, I understand, or not a bedpan, but it's like a bed warmer, and I understand like that's what it was for. But why did the camera keep like dwelling on it, and like the camera kept lingering on it when she put it away? I mean, it made me think, oh, that's going to be important later. And then when she got locked up in the room, I was like, oh, she's presumably going to use like the bedpan thing to get out. And no, she doesn't, and it's just not even there. So that just seemed weird to me. That was a really strange like directorial decision or like editing choice to actually really focus on that. Also, when it came to that scene with like Ian coming over and arguing with Leary, I mean, what was going on with her? I mean, when Bree came up and went through, you would have thought she'd gone to the defense of like the woman with with the guy sitting arguing with her that, but she just kind of walks in and is like, "Hi guys, what's going on?" And I know that that's so like later on she can be friendly with Ian, but it just seems really weird. I mean, why did she even walk in the first place? I mean, I just didn't buy that scene. And on the Roger side of the story, I mean, pretty much enjoyed his side of the story, but maybe it might have made sense to like quarantine people on the boat, and maybe that wasn't possible. I mean, I just don't know. But some part of me like thinks that maybe actually Stephen Bonnet wasn't making the worst decision by throwing the people out. I mean, he wasn't doing it nicely, but maybe it's not the worst decision. I don't know enough about sea travel. I mean, I know they quarantined the guy in that bit in Cloud Atlas, like, and that's set around the same time, and that didn't seem to be a problem. They just stuck him down in the hold, and so maybe that's like not a thing. I've not watched enough Hornblower in it or Black Sails or anything like that to really know enough about it, but anyway, it just seemed like a strange thing for like Roger to get completely insane about. I mean, it's probably not a nice situation to be in, but maybe it's just me, and it's hard for me to dislike Aragon with his wee cheeky grin. Oh, anyway, this was a fascinating week, and I can't wait to see how things are going to continue. Because I mean, these last few episodes have just been getting better every single week. So until next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.